October 732, the Frankish shield wall breaks, Europe's future changes. Late October 732, somewhere between Poitiers and Tours, two armies stare each other down across muddy ground. One side is the Umayyad force from Al-Andalus, light cavalry, battle-hardened from years of campaigning across Iberia and southern Gaul. The other side is Frankish infantry, assembled by a guy who isn't even a king. His name is Charles. Charles Martel, Charles the Hammer. His official title is Mayor of the Palace, which sounds like a butler. He's actually the power behind the Merovingian throne, a warlord in everything but name. For years he's been grabbing Frankish territory, fighting rivals, building the army that will eventually produce his grandson, Charlemagne. But none of that exists yet. Facing him is Abdul-Rahman al-Ghafiqi, governor of Al-Andalus. This isn't some adventure-seeking raider. He's a senior provincial administrator who spent years stabilizing Umayyad control in Iberia. His campaign north is a raid, not a conquest. The target is simple: the wealthy churches and monasteries of Aquitaine and the Loire Valley. Here's what actually happened. The two armies camped across from each other for several days. Nobody wanted to attack first. Eventually, Abdul-Rahman ordered his cavalry to charge the Frankish formation, a dense wall of infantry drawn up in a tight square. The Frankish line held. It held again. And again. Then, during one of the later charges, a Frankish raiding party hit the Umayyad camp. The cavalry turned back to protect their loot and their families. In the confusion, Abdul-Rahman was killed. Without their commander, the Umayyad force pulled out south overnight. The raid was over. Martel had won. The 18th century historian Edward Gibbon later wrote that this battle saved Christianity and, by extension, European civilization. In one famous passage, he imagined Oxford students studying the Quran if Tours had gone the other way. That image stuck. It became one of history's favorite turning points. But modern historians have spent decades pushing back on the idea that Tours was a civilizational cliff edge. The Umayyad force was a raiding party, not an invasion army. There was no plan to conquer Francia. No occupation government waiting. No supply chain for a sustained campaign. And the Umayyads had already been stopped once. In 721, Duke Odo of Aquitaine defeated a Umayyad army at Toulouse. A decade before Martel, the Pyrenees were a real barrier. Southern Gaul was already a contested frontier zone, not a highway north. So the real picture is messier than Gibbon's cliff edge. Tours was significant. It boosted Martel's prestige, ended the immediate raiding threat, helped secure the Carolingian rise. But it wasn't the moment that saved Europe. Europe wasn't about to be lost. Now from here we speculate. What follows is speculation grounded in real events, real geography, real logistics. We're not rewriting the world. We are tracing the plausible consequences of one bad day. Here's the divergence. The Frankish shield wall breaks. Maybe on the fourth charge, maybe the fifth. The infantry square collapses. Charles Martel is killed in the rout, trampled or cut down as the line disintegrates. Abdul-Rahman survives. The Frankish army scatters into the October fog. Abdul-Rahman now controls the battlefield, but he still has the same army he arrived with, a raiding force, not an occupation army. He can't conquer Francia with it. What he can do is sack Tours, loot the Loire Valley monasteries, and return to Al-Andalus with enormous prestige and enormous wealth. And here's where the cascade begins. With Martel dead, the Frankish territories fragment. His sons, Pepin the Short among them, are young. The Merovingian court is a nest of rival claimants. The Aquitanians, the Burgundians, the Provençals all have their own agendas. There is no unified Frankish response. The following spring, Abdul-Rahman, or his successor, if the campaign cost him too, returns north. Not with a raiding party this time, with an army. The political vacuum in Francia makes the Loire Valley a realistic target for permanent control, not just seasonal raiding. So how far north could Umayyad rule realistically reach? Not as far as you might think, and not for the reasons most people guess. The limit isn't military resistance. It's something more boring and more powerful: logistics, climate, and the sheer economics of holding territory. Start with geography. The Loire River runs east-west across France. South of it, the climate is Mediterranean. Dry summers, mild winters, the agricultural patterns the Umayyads knew in Iberia and North Africa. North of it, the climate shifts, wetter, colder. Different soil, different crops, different farming rhythms. An Umayyad administration could adapt, but adaptation takes generations, not campaigns. The immediate problem is feeding an army. The Umayyad supply system relied on Mediterranean ports and river networks. North of the Loire, the rivers flow differently, the roads are worse, and the ports face the Atlantic, not the inland sea. Then there's the forest. Northern Gaul in the 8th century is heavily wooded. The great clearances haven't happened yet. Cavalry, the Umayyad military advantage, is less effective in dense forest and rolling hills than on the open plains of Iberia or the Mediterranean coast. So the realistic northern boundary of sustained Umayyad control is the Loire, maybe the Seine at a stretch. Paris is possible. It's a river city, connected to the Atlantic and the Mediterranean via the Seine and the Rhone. But beyond Paris, the terrain, the climate, and the logistics all push back. The Rhine is the hard stop. The Germanic tribes east of the Rhine, the Saxons, the Thuringians, the Bavarians, are not fractured Gallo-Roman nobles. They're organized, they're militant, and they have nothing the Umayyads want. No wealthy monasteries, no Mediterranean trade goods. Just forest, swamp, and warriors. But the Mediterranean is a different story. Southern Gaul, the Rhone Valley, Provence, these are Mediterranean worlds. They share climate, trade networks, and agricultural patterns with Al-Andalus. If the Umayyads hold the Loire, they certainly hold the Rhone. Marseille, Arles, Avignon become Umayyad cities. And Italy is the great prize. The Lombard kingdom is divided, weak, sitting on the richest church lands in Europe. An Umayyad push from Provence across the Alps, or from Sicily, which they already hold, could realistically take Rome within a generation. The papacy faces an existential threat. But here's the twist nobody expects. The papacy doesn't stay in Rome. With the Lombards unable to protect it and the Umayyads advancing, the Pope does what institutions do when threatened. He looks for a patron. And the only power capable of protecting the papacy is now the Byzantine Empire. In our timeline, the papacy turned to the Franks, specifically Pepin and Charlemagne, because the Byzantines couldn't defend Rome. In this timeline, with the Franks broken, the papacy turns east. The Byzantine emperor becomes the Pope's protector. The Eastern and Western churches don't split in 1054. They can't afford to. That means no Carolingian Empire, no Charlemagne crowned emperor by the Pope in 800, no Holy Roman Empire. The entire political architecture of medieval Western Europe, the competition between Pope and emperor, the Germanic imperial tradition, it simply doesn't develop. What does develop? A three-way Mediterranean world, Umayyad Al-Andalus and its Gallic territories in the west, a Byzantine-protected Italian peninsula in the center. And beyond the Rhine, the Germanic world, untouched, unconquered, developing on its own trajectory without Roman or Frankish mediation. Now, does this mean Europe becomes Islamic? No. The Umayyad Caliphate itself was already fracturing by the 740s. The Abbasid revolution overthrew them in 750. Al-Andalus would face its own crises, its own succession wars. Holding the Loire frontier would stretch any provincial governor past the breaking point. The more likely outcome is gradual reconquest. A fragmented but surviving Frankish nobility, possibly allied with the Saxons or the Lombard remnants, pushes back over decades. The Loire Valley changes hands. The Rhone stays Umayyad longer. The Mediterranean world stays connected, but the northern frontier eventually reasserts itself. So what actually changes? Not the survival of Christianity, not the fundamental culture of Northern Europe. What changes is the political shape of the West. No Carolingian Renaissance, no unified Frankish Germanic Empire, no investiture controversy. The medieval church stays aligned with Constantinople, and Western Europe develops as a looser, more decentralized, more Mediterranean-facing world. Gibbon was wrong about the stakes. Tours didn't save Europe from Islam, but Tours did something almost as important. It created the political conditions for the Carolingian world, for Charlemagne, for the Holy Roman Empire, for the entire medieval competition between church and state that shaped Western civilization. Without Tours, Europe doesn't fall. It just becomes something entirely different. And that raises the real question, would that different Europe have been more or less stable than the one we got? Tell me what you think in the comments. Subscribe for more alternate history grounded in real events, and tell me below, would a Mediterranean-facing Europe have been more stable?